Studies Section 12. Planning the Nigeria Economy. Introduction. Development planning involves the deliberate effort on the part of government to speed up the process of social and economic development. In this study session, we will focus on the need for development planning, whether of the centralized, control, or of the mixed economy. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study section, you should be able to explain the rationale for development planning in Nigeria, discuss the nature of Nigerian developmental planning from pre-independence till date, explain the rationale for the establishment of Structural Adjustment Program (SAP) in Nigeria. Rationale for development planning in Nigeria. Development planning in Nigeria has taken place in response to the market failure argument prevalent in most developing countries, where there still exists structural and institutional rigidities inhibiting the operation of the invisible hand of the market. These rigidities are mainly on account of poor infrastructural facilities, which restrict mobility and communications, the presence of acute manpower shortages in very critical areas, institutional problems resulting from frequent changes in government policies, an unstable political environment, and a low level of societal awareness as reflected in a high level of illiteracy. The plans are thus designed as a mechanism for identifying appropriate programs and policies for government intervention in the various segments of the economy to take care of the areas of market failure and to provide appropriate signals for private sector operators. Some of the clear instances of market failure that have been rectified through the mechanism of development planning include government intervention programs in the provision of education, healthcare delivery, the provision of motorable roads, and urban mass transit, to mention a few. These programs also highlight the role of development planning as a strategy for achieving a more equitable development, especially in regard to attaining a fairer income distribution and poverty alleviation. Development planning is also important because it is an effective strategy whereby the developing countries could catch up with their developed counterparts within the shortest period. In this regard, reliance is placed by government on the planning mechanism of resource mobilization and the channeling of the same to address critical problem areas, including the provision of infrastructural facilities and social amenities. The same principle applies to the wide range of macroeconomic and sectoral policies that are embodied in development plans to foster a conducive environment for economic development and growth. In this regard, the success of the first, second, and third national development plans in reducing bottlenecks to economic development with regards to the provision of infrastructural facilities and social amenities bear testimony to this. With regards to the provision of infrastructural facilities and social amenities bear testimony to this. Another reason for adopting the planning strategy in Nigeria was on account of demands from international aid donors whose requirement for assistance to developing countries often included a good presentation on resource projections and well-packaged programs and projects, some of which would be candidates for external funding. This approach is still considered relevant today, even though the number of external funded government projects has reduced drastically. Each successive government in the effort to gain relevance and acceptability, tries to map out its program, priorities, and an action plan to implement the programs. Such programs are usually implemented within the framework of short-term, medium-term, and long-term development plans. In the same vein, development planning is considered a meaningful strategy that can foster appropriate policy environment to enable the country effectively harness its resource endowment for economic prosperity and growth. For any corporate entity, be it an individual or group of individuals, government or non-governmental organization, state government or a national body, ultimate survival depends on the ability to set clearly defined objectives and goals and map out a strategy for the attainment of the same. Question: explain the rationale behind the existence of a development planning in Nigeria. Feedback: the essence of a development planning in Nigeria is to correct for market failure that is associated with the inability of invisible hand to regulate the prevailing economic activities in Nigeria due to absence of the basic infrastructure that will allow invisible hand to thrive. Review of development planning in Nigeria, 1945 to 1997. Pre-independence development plans. The 10-year development plan of 1945 to 1955, which was drawn up for Nigeria and 17 other colonies by the colonial administration, marked the beginning of development planning in Nigeria. Based on report of the World Bank mission to Nigeria in 1951, the plan was aborted in 1951 to be superseded by the 1951 to 1955 development plan. This was in turn overtaken by the 1955 to 1960 development plan, which gave due recognition to the establishment of the North, East, and Western regions of the Federal Capital Territory of Lagos. The series of pre-independence development plans had a number of concrete achievements to their credit in terms of enhancing the availability of infrastructural and social facilities in the various parts of the country, including the provision of roads, potable water, electricity, healthcare delivery, telecommunications, and educational facilities. However, they were not based on clearly identified national objectives and priorities. They may, therefore, not be regarded as plans in the conventional sense. Question: what do you think was the remarkable achievement of the pre-independence plans in Nigeria? Feedback: the remarkable achievement of the pre-independence development plan was due recognition given to the establishment of the North, East, and Western regions and the Federal Capital Territory of Lagos. Post-independence development plans. Efforts to harness available domestic and external resources towards the attainment of economic development and growth to meet the yearnings or aspirations of the newly independent country commenced with the first National Development Plan 1962 to 1968, followed by the second National Development Plan 1970 to 1974, the third plan 1975 to 1980, and the fourth plan 1981 to 1985. The four development plans had common objectives which can be summed up as follows. 1. Achievement of a dynamic, self-sustaining growth for the economy. 2. Improvement in standards of living. 3. An enhanced per capita income. 4. Reduction in the level of unemployment. 5. Diversification of the economy. 6. A balanced development. And 7. The indigenization of economic activities. The strategy of the first plan was to lay an enduring foundation for national development in terms of infrastructure and social facilities as the basis for private sector investment. The second plan, based on the country's oil-enhanced economic fortunes, was geared towards post-Civil War reconstruction through rehabilitation and expansion of existing socio-economic infrastructures, enhanced participation of government in agricultural production, and the promotion of domestic industries through an import substitution strategy. The strategy of the third National Development Plan was to utilize government-enhanced revenues from the oil sector to boost the standards of living of the generality of the populace through the expansion of facilities in the areas of healthcare delivery, education, potable water, electricity supply, and telecommunications facilities, among others. This measure was complemented by import liberalization measures for consumer goods and an emphasis on national value-added industries, that is, industries that use small local resources in determining the public sector industrial project for the plan. The fourth National Development Plan of 1981 to 1985 pursued the same strategy as the third plan, although it was based on a much higher expectation of revenue generation. Despite the similarities in the objectives and goals of the four development plans, the first plan was quite distinct from the succeeding second, third, and fourth development plans in terms of program orientation and strategy. The first plan had a large dose of foreign consultancies input in its preparation and placed greater emphasis on projects that were commercially viable and stood a good chance of yielding a high level of returns within the short to medium term. Indeed, W.E. Stolper, who coordinated the preparation of the plan, expressed grave misgivings about the admission of projects with long-term gestation periods into the plan on the grounds of long-term national interest, such as employment generation and foreign exchange conservation. In contrast, however, the second, third, and fourth national development plans were prepared by the National Planning Office based on the admissibility of projects on the national value-added concept, whereby projects that would use more local resources but with lower levels of commercial profitability and a longer gestation period were admitted. This was the genesis of the steel sector project, the LNG plant, the power generating station, the sugar companies, and the paper mills, among others, rather than have a fifth development plan that would have spanned the period 1986 to 1990. The country adopted a policy plan, otherwise known as the Structural Adjustment Program, in an effort to redress the policy lapses of the past and also to meet the conditions of the international financial institutions for a review of the country's growing external debt burden. Question: how many post-independence developmental plans engaged in by the Nigerian government till date? Feedback: Nigerian government had so far engaged in 4 developmental plans till date. These are: first, 1962 to 1968, second, 1970 to 1974, third, 1975 to 1980, and fourth, 1981 to 1985. Structural Adjustment Program. The Structural Adjustment Program (SAP) was introduced on June 27, 1986 as a policy instrument to address the grave distortions that had reduced a booming and dynamic economy to a state of acute depression and negative growth during the 1982 to 1985 periods. The SAP strategy was mainly predicated on demand management and deregulation of prices as a measure of curtailing fiscal and external imbalances. The ultimate objective of the program was to achieve non-inflationary growth and the stimulation of domestic production of tradable goods. The expected outcomes of the structural adjustment program were as follows. 1. The resumption of a dynamic non-inflationary growth. 2. An enhanced agricultural production sector and the emergence of domestic manufacturing outfits that would be competitive in the international economy. 3. The naira would assume its true scarcity value and become stable under a regime of curtailed fiscal deficit and a restrictive monetary policy. 4. The economy would achieve a sustainable external debt service profile. And 5. An enhanced level of domestic savings and investment coupled with an enhanced inflow of external resources would be achieved. After about 15 years since the adoption of SAP, it was safely concluded that most of the expectations that informed its adoption were not materialized, although SAP was able to reverse the general decline in the economy. GDP average growth rate increased from a negative 0.35% per annum during 1982 to 1985 to about 3.0% per annum during 1986 to 1998. The program could not deliver a non-inflationary growth pattern, a prerequisite for macroeconomic stability. The program also failed to deliver enhanced efficiency in resource mobilization as attested by the declining investment GDP ratio, the enhanced savings rate from an average of 7.8% per annum during 1982 to 1985 to 19.8% during 1986 to 1994, notwithstanding. Furthermore, the expected boost in non-oil exports did not materialize. Finally, most of the country's external collaborators reneged on their promise to give the economy the much needed debt relief and to guarantee a steady inflow of concessional resources. This was to complement domestic savings and thus help to strengthen the level of domestic investment. The 3-year rolling plan approach commenced in 1990. The shift in strategy was as a result of the huge resource shortfalls which adversely affected the performance of the 1981 to 1985 developmental plan. From that experience, it became clear that the country could no longer depend on the fixed-term, 5-year plans in a situation where the economy had become largely exposed to the volatilities of the international oil markets. The structural adjustment program was designed to take care of the difficulties that had developed in the economy arising from the huge shortfalls in oil sector earnings, including persistent fiscal deficit, huge deficit in the balance of payment account, a huge backlog of ongoing uncompleted projects, and the high incidence of external debt servicing as a result of the rapidly increasing level of external indebtedness, among others. The program was, therefore, aimed at providing the policy framework for the successive rolling plans, whose main thrust was to address the problems of the huge backlog of ongoing, uncompleted projects and to resuscitate some of the abandoned projects. Evidence of poor plan implementation abounds throughout the country in the form of large numbers of uncompleted or abandoned projects with the attendant colossal waste of economic and human resources. The oil sector has, since the 1970s, accounted for over 85% of fiscal resources and about 95% of foreign exchange earnings. At the same time, agriculture and manufacturing, the former key productive sectors of the economy, have become relatively insignificant in the face of large-scale importation of consumer items and raw materials. The situation has been compounded by the very poor state of existing utilities and infrastructures, including the road network, telephone services, electric power supply, potable water supply, healthcare delivery, and educational facilities. These lapses have engendered a chaotic environment and an atmosphere of pervasive resignation and cynicism. Question: mention any two positive and negative effects each of structural adjustment program in Nigeria. Feedback: we don't know exactly what you may think of, but some positive effects of SAP are: foreign exchange is facilitated, systematic collection development is encouraged, local publishers are supported, etc. On the other hand, the negative effects of SAP include large price increase for essential services. Government appropriations for public libraries have risen very slightly or actually fallen. Building projects have been delayed or cancelled, etc. Studies section summary. In this studies section, you learn that planning is an important tool to achieve success, and it is defined as an exercise of forethought in an attempt to select the best means of attaining specified goals. Various development planning has been executed in Nigeria from the period of colonial rule until now. Each of the development planning are put in place to achieve some set of objectives depending on the economic situation of the country. They are broadly grouped into pre-independence development plans, post-independence development plans, and specifically divided into First National Development 1962 to 1968, Second National Development Plan 1970 to 1974, the Third National Development Plan 1975 to 1980, the Fourth National Development Plan 1981 to 1985. All the four development plans had common objectives. This is the end of study session 12. Thanks for listening.